And they come as Alberta's COVID curve.
COVID-19.
COVID-19.
La COVID.
COVID. 80% of this community was vaccinated.
That's another thing.
Serre-moi dans tes bras, puis hurle, puis braille.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Hi everyone.
Ici Céline Galipo.
This is Céline Galipo. I am the news anchor of the Téléjournal at 10 p.m. Radio-Canada. Welcome to our annual public meeting. A little bit later, I will have the pleasure of moderating a discussion panel with 6 of our foreign correspondents. But first, let's listen to my very talented colleague, Catherine Verdon-Diamond.
First, we'll go to my colleague, Catherine Verdon-Diamond, who had a chance earlier this month to sit down with CBC Radio-Canada's president and CEO, Catherine Tait, and Michael Goldbloom, chair of the board of directors, to talk about the past year, quite a grueling one, as we all know, but thank God we're getting over it, and to also look at what's ahead for Canada's public broadcaster. Catherine.
What a year. Quelle année incroyable.
What an incredible year.
I'm Catherine Verdon-Diamond, host of our Montreal on CBC Television, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to your National Public Broadcasters 2021 Annual Public Meeting. Merci de vous joindre.
Thank you for joining us for this annual public meeting held virtually and produced in Montreal. First, I wish to mention that the lands on which we are holding this event today are part of the traditional unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka, which for a long time has been a place of gathering and exchanges between nations.
It's been an incredible year for Canadians and, of course, our national public broadcasters. So, Michael, I'm going to begin with you. How did we manage through COVID?
Well, as you said, Catherine, I mean, what an extraordinary year for every Canadian, for every family, for every organization. From the board's perspective, and it occurs to me I may have said this a year ago, but it's been 15 months we've been living this pandemic. From the board's perspective, we had two priorities. The first was the health and safety of our employees, and the second, of course, was to do what we could to support Catherine and her team in informing Canadians. On both of those counts, I think we did pretty well. We have, 7,500 employees, I think, all across the country, right? Every province, every territory. I think it's like 60 different communities, and something like 80% of our team were working from home with all the stresses that we all know came with that. But they rose to the occasion in an extraordinary way. And I think that we were careful about COVID, and there were very few cases in the workplace, so we're pleased about that. You know, you learn a lot about an organization and yourself in a time of crisis. And I think we learned a lot about ourselves, and it was very gratifying that so many Canadians turned to us for information. And, you know, I think it's a figure like 24 million visitors per month to our digital sites since January. So Canadians have been thirsty for information, and CBC Radio Canada has been there to provide the information. So it's been a challenging year. I hope we never have to live it again. But I think I'm very proud of how CBC Radio Canada performed.
Catherine, what do you have to say about that?
Well, just on a practical level, we did have to pivot for sure. And comme Michael l'a dit, 80%
As Michael said, 80% of our employees are still working from home, and they had to find solutions that were innovative in order to be able to produce the content and to serve our communities. So it was incredible.
We saw some innovation and extraordinary creative solutions to the business of producing content. We had, I don't know how many shows produced out of people's closets, radio shows. We even saw Adrienne Arsenault deliver The National from her porch. So it was really, as Michael said, exceptional. But also on the independent production side, I cannot stress enough how fantastic our partners have been. Shows were shut down, they were interrupted, schedules were really turned upside down. And thanks to government funding to help deal with the incremental costs associated with COVID, we were able to get all those productions back up and running. So it was really an extraordinary year. And wherever CBC Radio-Canada could help, we tried. So for the cultural community, think about artists, performers who had nowhere to go. Theaters are closed. We tried to partner with the Canada Council and others to present and to offer an opportunity for those artists to keep on doing the work that they do.
Qu'est-ce que vous avez vu?
What have you seen that was very difficult in the course of the past 15 months? Catherine, I'm going to start with you. Well, of course, there were all the issues linked to COVID, that's for sure, but we also saw with the question of diversity and inclusion, we did have an enormous reaction amongst Canadians and our employees who were asking for an action plan from their public broadcaster in order to be able to face the questions of systemic racism in all of our public institutions.
So it was, when I say it was an extraordinary year, we had on the one hand a pandemic, but we also had a huge social justice reckoning. And as the public broadcaster, and I know that the board of directors was very supportive of this, that we really feel we have a leadership role to play in addressing systemic racism, not only in how we present stories to the public, but to ensure that the public, all Canadians see themselves in their public broadcaster. Alors non seulement devant.
So not only in front of the camera, but behind it as well. I think that it is so important that the public broadcaster be a true reflection of our country. And the board is very, very proud of the leadership that Catherine has shown since her first day as CEO to bring forward diversity and inclusion everywhere in CBC Radio-Canada. It was so important for her, and it's been a pleasure for us to support her in this very essential step for the entire country. And as a Black woman,
definitely emotionally taxing at times for me and my colleagues who look like me. And so I want to ask you, of course, what does that mean for you guys, for our future, and for the future of what we've seen with the racial pandemic? What do you see happening? What's the changes?
Well, just on the programming side, when we talk about representation, what does that actually practically mean? So here in Montreal, we saw a fantastic documentary by one of your colleagues, Isabelle Racicot.
Yes.
Pour mes fils, mon silence est impossible, which talks about what it is to be a Black journalist and raising boys in this society. But at the same time, we're looking to our creative partners in the independent production community to bring forward stories that are authentic and true to their communities. So a couple of great examples there. And by the way, it doesn't have to be just TV shows. We have a wonderful podcast which is deals with the language that has been appropriated to tell stories around Indigenous people and the prejudice around Indigenous people, just really embedded in language. This is a podcast called Laissez-nous raconter nos histoires crochis.
Oui,
yes,
I listened to one of those podcasts.
It
won a prize at the Paris Festival, and we also did at the same time, we did an English version for CBC.
CBC version called Twisted Histories.
Yes.
So those are kind of examples of the how programming changes. It's a filter for everything we do. We shine a diversity lens, not just in the newsroom and what stories we're going to cover, but also in the programming and the kinds of people we're inviting to the table.
And Catherine, I know that you've been virtually visiting communities and our stations across the country. So people want to know, what has stood out for you from these visits?
What I've been able to see is that truly, it's the regions. That is the beating heart, the very heart of what we do. Out of the 20 multi-platform stations that we have in Radio-Canada, 12 are in a linguistic minority area, whether it be Moncton or Edmonton or Toronto. So really, that is where we play such a vital role. Because for those people, for the Francophones in a minority, who live in a place where they are the minority, it is the true lifeline for culture and for language.
I can say that on the one hand, our regions are the beating heart of what we do, but we are in places where nobody else is. There might not be a French alternative media for Francophones living in Edmonton. Similarly, in the north of Canada, CBC North provides services in 8 Indigenous languages. No one else is there doing that.
Michael, est-ce que vous aimeriez ajouter quelque chose?
Michael, would you like to add anything to that? Yes. First, local coverage. It's become even more obvious that it is so important to Canadians, and that a public broadcaster has been present in all those communities, obviously, that is vital. And we also have to recognize that we are going through a very difficult moment for private media. And it seems to me that there are 2 reactions. One, it's even more important that the public broadcaster be present at a time where private media, because of changes to their business model, are going through really difficult times. So it was vital and essential that the public broadcaster be there, particularly for local news. But as well, we have an obligation, Catherine and myself and the board, I believe, to be able to find ways of helping out private media to be able to survive. So we have set up a way for Canadians to be able to support their private local media. It's important for us to make sure that there is a media ecosystem that is strong in our country.
It's important that our programs capture the attention of international audiences. So this is really going to be interesting. Why is this important, and what can the public broadcaster do about this?
Well, honestly, we're no longer working in just a domestic industry. We know that we're now on a global stage. And so it's not just about promoting Canadian culture abroad. I mean, we saw Schitt's Creek take every award in the comedy category at the Emmys this year. It made television history. We saw C'est comme ça que je t'aime feted in Berlin. We know that we have a role to play to support Canadian culture on an international stage. But we also have a role to play in transmitting our values and our culture, our values of tolerance to others in the world, others who may be coming to Canada or may be considering coming and making a life in Canada. But also with our public broadcaster colleagues and other news media organizations, we have a role to play, as Michael just said, to ensure safe, good, credible information. There is so much disinformation, misinformation out there. That's another role that we play on the international.
Fake news.
Exactly,
Oh,
exactly. Yeah. And if I can, we also have a role to play with our partners internationally to combat online hate. Particularly where it targets women and racialized women in our journalistic ranks. That's another thing that we're working on on the international level.
Michael, est-ce que vous voulez ajouter quelque chose à ça aussi?
Did you want to add anything to that?
Well, Catherine, we're here, it's an annual meeting, so one inevitably thinks about the past year. And for me, a lot of the memories of this past year are going to be pretty painful. I think that's true for many Canadians. That horrific image of George Floyd being murdered, many of us here in Quebec and in French Canada would have in our ears that voice of Joyce Echaquan before she died in the hospital in Joliette, the killings in Nova Scotia, the airline that the Iranians shot down, and all the lives that were tragically lost in that, and then recently, of course, the discovery of the unmarked graves of those 215 Indigenous children in Kamloops. Those are all really painful memories. But there are positives. I'm sure most of us remember getting our shots of the vaccine. And Catherine mentioned, I mean, I think it should be underlined that Schitt's Creek swept the Emmys, a record accomplishment for every Canadian, and certainly everyone involved in creating the show and everyone who watched and supported the show. I think it was an extraordinary accomplishment, and we should all be really, really, really proud of that. And
I wanted to add that I was amongst like the 4.6 million Canadians who were to listen to the Bye-Bye this year. And it was the show, I think, that was the most watched in French in the history of the country. So it shows once again how much the public broadcaster can bring all Canadians together.
The other thing I was thinking about this year is, one, this is the first time that Catherine and I have been in the same room since our last annual public meeting.
Wow.
Right?
All through Zoom all this time.
Right, just an awful lot of Zoom meetings. And that also means for our board, we had 3 new members that join our board this year, and they participated in all our meetings, but I've actually never met them in person.
Oh, that's
So
insane.
I am so hoping that this pandemic is going to be behind us soon, and that we'll all have occasions in our personal and professional lives to get together with the people we care about and the people we work with.
Well, listen, I have to say thank you to the both of you. Merci beaucoup à vous deux.
Thank you to you both for having taken the time to be here with me today for this such an important conversation.
And for spending the morning with me to discuss this wonderful thing here with the APM meeting. Thank you so much.
Well, Catherine, if I may, I'd like to thank everyone who's watching this. I mean, Canadians across the country. And we know how much Canadians care about their public broadcaster, and sometimes they're very critical and sometimes they're very supportive, but we know how much they care. So I appreciate the interest that people are showing by being with us today. And moi, j'aimerais vous remercier beaucoup.
And I'd like to thank you for having welcomed us and for this beautiful conversation. Thank you. Oh, you're welcome.
Catherine and Michael, merci à toi. Thank you so much. I'm pleased to introduce you to the Board of Directors Et tout de suite après, nous passerons
And
à
right
notre
after,
conversation
we will
avec
go
le
to our,
correspondant animé par Céline
to
Galipo.
our conversation with our foreign correspondents that will be moderated by Céline Galipo.
Nous sommes fiers de vous présenter les membres de notre conseil d'administration d'un océan à l'autre et saluer la contribution de chacun. Les voici. We are proud to present the members of our board of directors from coast to coast to coast and salute everyone's contribution. Here they are.
Thank you, Catherine. Bonjour à nouveau.
So
Hi
hello again.
Une des priorités du
One of the priorities of the public broadcaster, as you know, is to have Canada be promoted and projected onto the foreign stage for its culture, creators, and its values, and to cover also international news, which is just as important to allow Canadians to better understand the global context of the events that affect us. This Canadian perspective, and that is truly fundamental on what is happening in the world, is brought back to us, of course, by our foreign correspondents.
Correspondent myself, I'm really pleased to host this panel discussion with 6 foreign correspondents. If you don't know the annual public meeting, well, it's an occasion to discuss topics and themes that interest you as Canadians. You've sent us many questions over the past month, and today our correspondents will get a chance to answer them for you. Ils vont nous en dire
They're going to tell us a little bit more about their work and also will let us know the different issues that they've experienced everywhere in the world.
We have brought together correspondents from both our networks, CBC and Radio-Canada. Please join me in welcoming from CBC, Stephen D'Souza. Stephen was based in New York. We join him today in Toronto. Hi, Stephen.
Hello.
Susan Ormiston is based in Washington, but she's covering this very important Biden-Putin summit in Geneva. Hi, Susan. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. Zoom, unmute. This famous button we all know about.
It was just a bonjour, Céline, and to say once a correspondent, you're always a correspondent.
Thank you. And Salima Shivji is in London. She will move to Mumbai, India in a few weeks. Hi, Salima.
Hi, Céline.
So, welcome to you all. Et de Radio-Canada.
And from Radio-Canada, we have our colleague who is also in Geneva, so Yannick Dumont-Baron, who is covering the summit. Hello, Yannick. Well, good evening, Céline. It's almost 11 p.m. here in Geneva. Most journalists who were here, who worked here all day, have already left and are home. Yes, thank you for reminding me of the time difference. And Annick Béraud, who has done every position, Washington, Jerusalem, Paris, Beijing. Hello, Annick. Hello, Céline and everyone. And our colleague Azev Valdi-Georgis, who has just been named in Washington and who is replacing, in an impromptu way, Tamara Tedesco, who could not be with us today. Hello.
Bonjour, Céline.
Hello.
Let me tell you how it's going to work. We have organized today's discussion into 3 segments based on the topics you've told us you're interested in. Voici donc les 3 thèmes.
So here are the 3 themes that we will be talking about today. The DNA of foreign correspondence, the subjects that concern you, pandemic, conflict, and geopolitical context, and information beyond borders. So let's get right into it. The correspondents, as you know, are part of a very select club within the public broadcaster. We're going to start right away with the behind the scenes of the job that really fascinates people.
Canadians are interested in hearing more about your work and the important role you play in bringing international news to Canadians. Alors, notre première
So the first question today is for Salima Shivji. It was sent by Eric from Quebec City.
How did you become foreign correspondent, and has it lived up to your expectations?
Well, if I had told my younger self about a decade ago that I'd be named as our new India correspondent in the middle of a pandemic with much of the world under stay-at-home orders, I think I wouldn't have believed myself. It sounds somewhat implausible, but one of the many things that I guess I didn't have on my 2020 bingo card, we all lost at bingo this year, didn't we? So it happened in the middle of a pandemic, but that's sort of when it became a little bit concrete that the CBC was moving forward with creating a brand new bureau in India, a country that needs a whole lot more coverage than it gets sometimes. So I was with the Ottawa Bureau as a parliamentary correspondent, but I was actually in Washington when the idea sort of became a bit more concrete and when it came out. So yeah, an opportunity to cover India, the world's fifth largest economy. Well, actually, it slipped down to sixth now because of the pandemic, but a country that means a lot for so many Canadians. So there you go. Has it lived up to expectations? I feel like expectations were all thrown out the window last year. So some things were very much unexpected in this last year as we've been getting the Bureau up and running. But some things, did go as expected. We actually expected it to take a bit of time to set up the Bureau, not just because of the pandemic, Celine, but of course, because it's a country where a lot of attention, a lot of scrutiny is paid to foreign coverage of what we're doing as foreign entities in that country. So it was expected it would take time. It has. But in terms of the reaction, some things, were as expected. It's been very rewarding to be down on the ground in Mumbai, in Delhi, covering some stories and to have people that you interview actually say, thank you, thank you for taking our stories and taking it back to a Canadian audience,
Yeah, very important to have Canadians covering international news for a Canadian public, I think. Now a question pour Azeb, une question de Nicole.
Azeb, a question from Nicole Thibault from Ottawa. Before this assignment to the United States, Azeb, I'd like to remind everybody, I can't hear you very well. Oh, and you're the closest to us, and you're the one who hears us the worst. That's really unfortunate. Yes, a bit of a paradox. Can you hear me better now? Yes. Okay, so what we'd like to know is what kind of training is offered to you before you arrive in a country in terms of safety, culture, etc. Like what kind of mentoring? Well, yes, there's not really any mentoring. There's not really any specific training. Of course, before going to a foreign country, so when I was based in Ivory Coast, we read as many books as possible. So I was based in Ivory Coast to cover 54 African countries. And it is a diversity of culture and languages. So what we do generally is we inform ourselves as much as possible. We try to learn a little bit the language of each country. For example, if you go in Tanzania, Swahili, or Lingala in Congo, just to learn how to say hello and thank you. That really brings us a lot closer to the people. From a point of view of training, there wasn't much. There's a little bit like Salima. When we went to Ivory Coast already over 20 years ago, there was just the two of us, and we went and arrived in the country, and it was really, once you're in the country, when you're not a special envoy, but when you were based in the country as a foreign correspondent, you really get impregnated with the culture, what's going on, people's mentality, and you start understanding. You go to markets, you go and just do your regular shopping, you rent an apartment, so you speak with owners. So that is how we get impregnated from a local culture. In England, of course, it was a completely different reality. It was in English, so I had to adapt myself to the fact that there was a lot of interest for the monarchy. I was working at the time for CBC, so we had to do a lot of, give a lot of information on the royal family. At the beginning, I didn't quite understand what the interest was, why it was so great, because I came from Montreal. But we realized that for the British, that family is sacred. The Queen is sacred. People respect her totally. So it was a bit of an adaptation, if you will. And of course, in the United States, there are neighbors. We know the United States pretty well. But the Washington office is really very different, I would say, from the office that we had in Africa. That is, in Washington, there were people who had been there for over 25 years, like the cameraman, Sylvain Richard as well, Marcel Caffa, the producer. So these are people who have been there for a really long time. So they already have database, they already know the country, they pretty already know the difference between the different states. So we don't just get parachuted alone when we cover a country like the United States. When you're you're based in Washington. But generally speaking, of course, you need to be open-minded, you need to be curious. We all are a little bit, and it really is a privilege, obviously, to be able to cover international news. And as Salima was saying, especially when we're in poor countries, whether it be in Africa or even, I can tell you, even in Canada, in the Aboriginal regions, people are so happy to see us arrive with our camera and to be able to tell their stories. Yes, very important. And a question for Nick now. Dwayne Richardson from Laval in Quebec would like to know, when correspondents learn that they will be covering a country or a continent, we talked a little bit the language, but do you try to learn one or many languages, or do you call local interpreters? You were in the Middle East and in China. How did that take place for you, Annick? Well, it really depends on the kind of assignment, because when you're sent, to cover a crisis or catastrophe and you arrive in a country, you don't speak the language. Obviously, we count a lot on our local interpreters. We call them fixers in the language. They're also researchers, they're guides, they're really decoders. They help us understand everything that's going on socially, politically, economically, to really understand what is happening in order to explain it properly to Canadians. So it took place in Asia very often, because I was based, of course, in Beijing, but to cover all of Asia. So as soon as I left the continental China to go to Thailand or Korea or Taiwan or Japan, well, on the premises, we get ready as much as possible when we arrive somewhere when it's a crisis. But when you go for greater coverage, as Ed was saying, well, you get informed, you try to know as much as possible on the subject that you will cover. And once on the premises, we still count on interpreters who are very often journalists. And before going to Beijing, where I was based for 4 years, for a few months, I took Mandarin classes. But once on the premises with the news, that was going so quickly, and all the, radio and web, you don't really have the time to take Mandarin classes to get better. So I really counted on one of the office employees who was really essential in Beijing, and Do Hao Tseng-Yi, who is really formidable, that link. And it's clear, and he was a journalist in France. He really supported me, he guided me, and it's teamwork. You're really not alone when you go there. For correspondents, work with people who are there to help us, and we try, we talk, we discuss about different ideas to know whether we really have understood the history correctly. And that is essential for the work of a correspondent. It's teamwork. Yes, I'd like to remind you that the Beijing office is one of the oldest offices for foreign correspondents that was set up in China at the time by our colleague Don Murray. So there's a true tradition of correspondence from CBC Radio-Canada there in China.
For Susan, you have reported, Susan, from 25 countries and war zones, including, and the list is very long, Afghanistan, Egypt, Libya, Ukraine, Lebanon, Syria, Israel. It's so impressive. And Dave Peterson from Vancouver wants to know, what's the craziest moment you have experienced so far as a reporter? It must be hard to choose just one, I guess.
It is, Dave. Thanks for the question. It is indeed hard to choose. There's so many kaleidoscopes of stories, and I've had humbling moments, I've had joyful moments, I've had very incredibly sad moments. I once had lunch, a goat lunch, with a warlord on the Afghan-Pakistan border. I was arrested in Egypt and then set upon by the mob of people trying to get through Cairo. There have been lots of hairy experiences, but when I thought about that question, I thought about this funny day in a very tragic 10 days in Ukraine. It was 2014. We were there to cover the MH17 disaster, the passenger aircraft that was shot out of the sky by a Russian missile. I was with Corinne Semenoff, our Moscow producer now, and Jean-François Bisson, our cameraman in London now. And we were at the end of a 10-day stretch. We were very tired, and it was a Sunday. And we thought, okay, what story can we do in, a very tense zone after such a tragedy? We're going to go to a church. We're going to go to a Ukrainian Orthodox church about an hour out of the city. So off we go in our van. We were half asleep. It was early in the morning, and, we were almost done. And out of the ditch come about 6 or 8 men, armed to the teeth, literally dash out of the ditch, run over to the van, stop our van, put their guns into the windows of our car and say, stop. Our translator's telling them, no, we're just going to the church. No, you can't, because up there are Russian tanks advancing by Russian rebels. We were in the middle of a hot zone. The war was resurfacing there. They said, if you go there, you will be between us and them, and you don't want to be there. And I agreed, we don't want to be there, but we couldn't turn around. So up the road we went for a mile, at a rapid pace. We got to a roadblock. There was a very tense group there, even more tense than the rest. And I thought, okay, we really need to turn around here. So as we were wheeling around and making our escape, I hoped, the van was stopped and the side door was pulled, wrenched open. And I thought, we're done for. We're done for. We're going to be carjacked. We're going to be taken to a prison somewhere. My heart was pounding, and in came a dog. A guy threw a dog in the back of the van and said, here, take my dog to the next village on your way back. I may not survive this day, but my dog will. Please do this for me. And then shut the door. So off we went, screaming down the road with the new puppy in the back of the van. We dropped it off at the next village and made our way safely back to the city. That was one of the craziest, funny, tragic, horrifying days.
Oh, what a story, Susan. But so you were afraid of your life. People often ask these questions to foreign correspondents. Are there moments where you really fear for your life?
You know, Celine, I often say this, and I say this to my family and my husband, that when we are in country, we are much better at assessing the risk than those at home who love us, because we see the full picture and we have communication with people on the ground, and we are assessing the risk factor at every hour. Should we advance? Should we stay in the hotel? Can we go to this interview safely? It's very important to have that network of people on the ground. So I wouldn't say, you know, a fear can be a very paralyzing emotion. And if I'm paralyzed by fear, not only can I not do my job, but I'll probably make bad decisions. So I would say more, we are supremely aware, acutely aware of the risks around us, and we're making a risk assessment at every time. There are situations where you are out of control. In Afghanistan, many times going down roads with the military or with our fixer, our local driver and fixer in a car, we were hostage to whatever was going to happen. But you do try very carefully to know your environment. You hone your instincts, having been in these situations many times, of what looks really dangerous and what you can, you know, pass by and safely go on. So, you know, happily survived, have never been injured, have seen a lot of dark moments. But I can't say, and I'm not going to be a Pollyanna about this, I can't say I love this work. I love the work. I feel so privileged to be a Canadian in the world, to be a translator of what is happening in the world, to try to take complex subjects and in a short time, digest them and tell people at home who trust us what we think is going on. There's nothing better than being there, nothing better than being there and seeing for yourself and then reporting it out. I can see my colleagues nodding. It's a privilege. I'm so proud of the work we do, and I'm grateful every day that I'm able to get out and do this.
And we're so lucky to have you, because you are our ears and our eyes in the world, and it's so important. Thank you, Susan. Maintenant, une question pour notre ami Yannick.
Question for our friend Yannick,
plusieurs années en France après avoir été basé aux États-Unis. C'est
C'est
Pierre Lafrance qui aimerait vous entendre sur ce que ça implique, la vie de correspondant. Yannick, qu'est-ce qui arrive aux amis des filles?
What happens to the friends of the children left behind the schooling, what you have to
ailleurs et
abandon to go
recommencer.
elsewhere and
Au fond,
start
quels
all
sont les
over again?
impacts sur la
Basically,
famille?
what are
Ça
the
demande
impacts on the
beaucoup
family?
d'adaptation,
It
tout
must
ça.
require a lot of adaptation.
Ben, ça demande de l'adaptation.
Well, it requires adaptation, and I'll include myself in that, because I think that we are all conscious of that fact when we go to another country, that it is temporary. It's not going to be permanent. We know that it's part of the rules of the game, if you will, but sometimes we forget relatively quickly. You know, from my own experience, the first year you adapt yourselves, you start understanding. The second year you feel really good there. It becomes home because you have friends. You know, the children have routines. They go to the pool. They do activities over the weekend.
Ça devient des amis, ça devient des routines.
We have friends. We have routines,
On vit un peu comme
and
des Français
we
ou
live
comme des
like the
Américains
French do,
avant,
or
dans mon
like
cas.
the United Staters do in my case
Et
when
là,
I
un
was
jour,
there.
il faut
And then one day you have to leave. And
Pour nous, c'est un
for
peu un
us,
rappel. Il
it's
faut
a
vivre le
reminder
moment
that we
présent,
have to
profiter de
live
ce
the
moment-là.
present moment, to
Il y a
take
beaucoup de
advantage of
boulot,
every
il y a
little
parfois
moment.
des
Yes,
moments
there's a
où on
lot
peut
of
en
work, and
profiter.
sometimes there's moments when we take
Petits moments de
advantage of it,
culture
you know,
ou
a moment of
qui sont intéressants juste
culture,
parce
things
qu'on
that are
est ailleurs,
interesting
qu'on
just
vit
because
autre
you're
chose. Donc
elsewhere
ça,
and you're experiencing something
on tente d'en
else.
profiter. C'est pas
So we
facile parce que
try
le
to
boulot est là,
take
parce que
advantage
la
of it,
routine
but
revient
it's
tout le
not
temps.
necessarily
Mais
easy.
quand arrive le moment où on
But
doit
when the
partir,
time
là,
comes when
c'est
you
plus
have to
compliqué.
leave, that's when things get more
Moi, je termine un
complicated.
mandat en
You know, I
France.
finish a mandate,
Les
I'm
enfants
finishing
ont
a mandate in
hâte à
France,
la
children are looking forward to. Snow in Canada, we're going back to Montreal, but at the same time, we feel when we talk to them, when we hear them talk, that they're going to miss friends, for example. They're going to miss certain things. My daughters are young, they're 8 and 10, so they think about, the croissant, the baguette.
La misère noire pour
Oh, yeah, such a hard time, Yes, exactly. But I'm certain that in Montreal, we're going to find great croissants as well. But you have to do it, and I think that when you do it, the children, we know that there will be a prize for them. We do the work for something, another reason. Well, they have to follow us. They don't have a choice, but they're also our guides. They're the witness in a certain way, the interpreter, because they are right into the culture even more than we are. They have, French friends, and they sometimes help us understand the culture. So that is reflected in what the work that we do. Well, yes, there's the adaptation to go, but also the adaptation when you come back. It does take a little bit of time to get used to things again, but we look forward to seeing you again and working with you again, Yannick.
Alors, c'est très intéressant comme discussion.
That was a really interesting discussion.
Because we have received plusieurs questions. On a reçu plusieurs questions, excusez-moi.
We've received many questions. I'm sorry, I'm going from French to English, but we've received many questions on different planetary issues, the pandemic, the conflict, the geopolitical context in certain regions.
Questions about challenges being faced around the world, such as the pandemic, international conflicts, and the geopolitical context in different regions. Alors, Rachid Ben Larbi.
So Rachid Ben Larbi is asking,
Stephen, has COVID had an impact on journalism as a profession?
It certainly has. I mean, you heard Susan talk about the risks that we face when we go into dangerous areas, and you add all of the risk on top of that. You're in a pandemic, and you remember, do I have my protective gear? Do I have my gas mask? If you're heading to a protest, and you remember, oh wait, do I have my regular mask, and am I going to be able to keep distance from everyone? So it's obviously had a very significant impact on what we do on a very practical level. And of course, I'm speaking to you from the newsroom in Toronto, which usually would be bustling and busy with people, yet here we are putting on a broadcast where people are working from home. But I think too, I think the pandemic, I hope, has had an impact as well as on our awareness of certain inequalities in society and the pressure points in society that were really hit hard during the pandemic. And we saw a lot of aspects of society that came to the forefront, and how the pandemic didn't affect everyone equally. And so I hope, there's been a new level of an awareness amongst journalists in our business of the pressure points in society, and that when things do eventually go back to normal, that we don't forget about those on the margins that were hit hardest by the pandemic, and that we can continue to focus on that. And I think we've also learned, the pandemic has also taught us in the business about communicating effectively, whether it be science and research, or just trying to reach people who may be vaccine hesitant or dealing with disinformation. The pandemic's really affected so many of us in so many different ways. And I think part of, as we assess what it's meant for journalism, part of it is we're still in the middle of it right now. And I was just talking to some of my colleagues in our health reporters who are, on the front lines of the story every day. And, we really haven't had a chance to sit back and take it all in. In Canada, of course, it's still under lockdown. I've been traveling back and forth. I just moved from the US, which is in a further state of opening up. I was just in Israel, which again is another place where it's fully vaccinated. So I've seen sort of different stages of people reopening. And so I think we're still at a point where, and at least in Canada, we're still, still emerging from things and still haven't had a chance to sit back and reflect on everything that's happened in the last year. And so I hope there will be a lot of lessons in our business, how we do our business, that the pandemic will have taught us.
We're even thinking or fearing a fourth wave, so it's not over yet. Azeb, un petit mot là-dessus?
Azeb, a word on that, the impact that it's had on the job of journalist. Yes, Céline, it is a pretty significant impact. I remember when it all started in March 2020 for us, we decided to cover it a little bit as if we were in a war zone, because it really was unknown territory. So we went, in Montreal, we filmed people who were getting tested. At the time, they were in their cars and being tested to know whether they were positive positive or negative, and we were really in unknown land, uncharted. So for us, the journalists, you know, the cameramen, usually we work very closely together. Now we had to keep a certain distance. We had to, you know, not get too close to colleagues to be able to not catch a virus. We had to disinfect microphones when we met people. I didn't do very many Zoom interviews. Generally speaking, we went right on the premises, but generally we did interviews outside, keeping that distance of 2 meters. But what's pretty interesting is that we were all in the same boat, if you will. So there was a kind of solidarity, a fraternity when facing this invisible enemy. So there was a kind of solidarity with the people that we were interviewing, whether it be pharmacists or doctors, nurses. There was a kind of, well, listen, we'll get there. We absolutely have to make sure that the information circulates. For those people who are at home, who are in lockdown, who can't go out, the information has to be there. And in the field as well, in the United States, it had become a little bit like an issue, the pandemic. There were people who were questioning the virus. So when we went, for example, to a rally, a pro-Trump rally, and you wore a mask to do the interviews, we were told, well, why are you wearing a mask? You know that virus is an invention. It doesn't even exist. It's fake news. So we had to, of course, deal with people who didn't even really believe in it much. And also, I think what the pandemic did, since people did stay in stay-at-home orders for a long time, all of a sudden when they came out, the pandemic kind of like, you know, brought forward emotions. People were very emotional. They wanted to talk. We really felt that there was a kind of frustration, that there was a kind of like that we had covered up their emotions. And when they came out, well, they wanted to criticize, to say that it didn't exist. So we had all sorts of reactions, but we had the impression that it went a little bit to extremes. Maybe I could describe it that way, this situation. For us journalists, well, for myself, I continued going and working in the field, and I was happy to do that, but it was a personal choice. Our jobs, our directors, you know, really gave us all the possible and imaginable choices, and I made this choice. Very well, thank you. That's really interesting, Azeb.
Richard Papineau à Montréal. It's for Salima. Salima, we hear very little about vaccination in countries where Canada has little economic interest. How is the pandemic and vaccination process going in African and other third world countries? So you're covering India. How is it going there?
Well, in short, Celine, not very well. India is in urgent need of more vaccines. They're in the midst, really, of a brutal second wave that hit them so hard that was, you know, making headlines quite a few weeks ago. But the situation is still quite serious there. And so there's a scramble for vaccines. There are shortages in many states. The government has decided to delay second doses to make it an even longer delay between doses. I was speaking to somebody in New Delhi just a little while ago who was saying she was trying to get an appointment, struggling to get an appointment on the online system, and finally got one in Agra, which is a 2-hour train ride away. And you know, that's if you have access to a computer and you're able to use the booking system. So it's difficult for so many Indians who don't have access, who are, you know, don't have facilities to book vaccines and whatnot. And that, with the situation in India, that's why you hear experts say, you know, everything is connected. If the pandemic is really serious in one place, it affects every other country. But because of the situation in India, it's had a domino effect on so many other countries, African countries as well, because India is known as the world's pharmacy. They were donating vaccines before. Now they're keeping them all at home. And so, you know, there is a huge gap between the vaccination systems and progress in countries like Canada. We're now top of the list in terms of giving out first doses. Compare that to, you know, the lower income countries in the world, which are at less than 1% of even first doses given. You know, Africa, many countries there are at around 2%. India is at around 15%. So there's a huge disparity, as Stephen was saying earlier, just about how the pandemic is affecting so many people in so many places in an unequal manner. So that inequity, we're going to hear more and more about it. Obviously, we've started to already. The G7 last week, the countries there had a lot of pressure to make an announcement. They did. They announced that they would be donated some 870 million doses, but so many people say that's just not enough. There needs to be more and a more equitable way to get these vaccines to so many third world countries. You know, I was speaking to a doctor in South Africa a couple of weeks ago for a story as well, and he was just saying, you know, vaccine hesitancy, yeah, that's a thing here, but what's most important is we can't get those doses. We just do not have enough supply.
Yeah, so we have to make a bigger effort to help all those countries. A question now for our US correspondent from Kurt Clyde. I know that the Biden administration and the Canadian government attack Putin vociferously, but seem more reticent in attacking President Xi. Is this because they fear being perceived as racist, particularly when the Democrats and liberals have been condemning anti-Asian racism? Stephen.
I don't think racism has very much to do with it, actually. I think it has more to do with economics. I think there is such a strong economic bond between the US and China that attacking China has repercussions economically. We've already seen, countries that have criticized what's happening in Xinjiang, where the treatment of the Uyghurs. We've seen China attack those companies that have criticized them. And so that happens on a political level as well. And so I think a lot of the attacks to Russia are really politically motivated and politically driven and don't really have as much of an impact as attacks on China. And then when you look at Canada, for example, you have the two Michaels who are being held there. So Canada, of course, is going to be more reticent in speaking out against China. And so I think racism has very little to do with it. I think it is more politically and more so on top of everything. I think it's economically driven in terms of why countries like Canada and the US may be more reticent to criticize China. But interestingly, if you listen to right-wing media in the US, Steve Bannon, Donald Trump's former political advisor, if you listen to him, his show, he's constantly criticizing China. He's constantly criticizing the Chinese Communist Party. They've become a place of attack. That has a lot of, there's a lot of domestic political reasons why he's doing that. But I think it really comes down to economics as to why China is not as attacked as much politically as Russia is right now.
Susan, you were in Geneva where there was this big summit today. So what can you add on this?
Well, I think just very little, really. Mostly that, think about how long Vladimir Putin has been in the public eye, how much he's been an actor, a huge actor on the world stage. So in part, that's why, there is this long list of attacks, and he's just been around as a leader for so long, and he has such a iron grip on that country and becoming more so in the last few years. So he is a target for many, many people by virtue of how long he's been in that post. It's so interesting, Celine. He's faced off against 5 US presidents now. He's sounding like the Queen now. She's met so many presidents. He's met so many presidents. It's quite phenomenal, his long reign, some would say, in that country. And so there's a lot of history there. And of course, ever since 2014, when Russia moved into Crimea, I was there. It's been a very virulent and volatile time. Canada still has sanctions, as do many international countries. And it will be very interesting to see what happens as a result of today. The tone was very positive today, but the devil is in the details, and we'll see if that dialogue remains open and where the next dividing line might come.
Let's move on to another question. Nous avons été témoins dans la dernière année de la montée du mouvement Black Lives Matter en Amérique du Nord.
Movement in North America. How has it been experienced on other continents? So Yannick, seen from France? Well, yes, in France as well, being black or having darker skin can bring to altercations, even death, when you meet up with police officers. Black Lives Matter took place in full pandemic, as in the United States. It brought a lot of people in the street. 20,000 people protested in front of the main tribunal in Paris. It was unauthorized, but it was tolerated because we did feel that the authorities wanted to calm things down a little bit. It was interesting that they chose a tribunal because one of the main recriminations, what people say who live on the outskirts of Paris, for example, people of color around Paris, is that there's the police officers on the one hand that treat people with inequity according to their skin skin color, but there's a justice system as well. For the police officers, it was pretty interesting. They met with some young black men who said very often police officers stop us and ask us for our papers. It just, that's legal in France. It doesn't need to be a reason to do so. It's just, your papers, your identity. They call it an identity control. And sometimes police officers try to provoke those young people to be able to then arrest them and bring them to police stations. That takes place sometimes. There are people who have died in this way in the altercations that followed. So there was that awakening. We talked about it. There are French people who are thinking we can't, put it all in the same pot because the situation is not the same in France that it is in the US. But there is something, France has a pretty complicated relationship with its former colonies on the one hand, but also with people with the color of their skin. There's no statistics held on skin color, and it's almost like, you try to ignore those problems and pretend that they don't exist. But with the rise of Black Lives Matter makes it that people are talking about it now. And talked as well about the death of George Floyd. That probably had an impact. It had a huge impact, not only in the United States, everywhere in North America. Well, yes, and that death was what I was describing to you earlier on. That protest was in the days that followed the beginning of the protest in Minneapolis. So we could really see that what was going on in the United States directly inspired militants here in France.
Yannick.
Thank you, Yannick.
How has this movement, Black Lives Matter, has been experienced on other continents?
Well, what's interesting, actually, the Black Lives Matter movement had a big impact on India, and it sort of evolved into a sharp critique of perceptions and what's been prevalent in India for a really long time, the idea that fair skin is more beautiful than darker complexions. So it really turned into quite a strong debate in India about that. The skin lightening products are everywhere. You go into any pharmacy, you'll see row upon row of products for people to buy to make their skins lighter, purporting to make your skins lighter. But it's big business in that country. So the Black Lives Matter movement really prompted a lot of thinking about that, a lot of talk about it. Basically, it's an issue that affects darker women in India. They face discrimination because of the color of their skin. So it prompted that debate, and it also prompted some change. So some companies actually withdrew some of their products. Johnson & Johnson was one that discontinued 2 products. There was another company, an Indian company, that actually was called Fair and Lovely. They changed the name of their product to Glow and Lovely, but limited change at that. That product is still on the shelves. It's still available to buy. So there you go.
So interesting to hear you all about these subjects that we don't know about. Very interesting. Now, a question about the pandemic. So, comment vous êtes-vous senti d'être loin de chez vous?
How did you feel being far away from home during the pandemic? I'd like to ask a question from Annick because Annick was in China when everything started. That must have been something. How was that managed with Radio-Canada? Well, you said, it was quite something. It wasn't known when I started talking about it at the radio and television. It wasn't called COVID-19. We're talking about the new coronavirus. And I was over there not only as a journalist, but I was trying to understand what was happening with the different information that came from the government, but also we heard things from social media, whistleblowers, but also as a resident in China. So we asked ourselves a lot of questions to know how to protect ourselves, where could we go to be able to do interviews as well, or even just shopping. And I talked about it every day with the international assigner, but as much, as the crisis got worse, I talked about it with upper management who wanted to know, do we have contingency plans? Was I in danger? What hospital could I go to if I caught COVID-19? So there was also a question at one point of, around China, when the country started locking down and closing their borders and China started ending up isolated, we wondered, the question on safety, what we're going to cover. Do you want to stay? And that was at the beginning of February, and I said, of course, I have to stay. We talked about it with many of my colleagues. We talked about the importance of being there, to be able to be witness, to be able to decode, to be able to understand what was happening, to explain it to Canadians. As Zeb was talking early on about a war zone, I want to say that at the beginning we felt like we were on a different planet because we were trying to explain within a measure, to explain what we were experiencing, because it looked like it was very far away for most Canadians what was happening in Asia, a continent that had already known pandemics. Maybe people were thinking, well, it's never going to make it here. So we felt like we really were on another planet. And I felt the obligation notion of staying as long as possible in China, which was like the ground zero, to explain what was happening by speaking with people, by also talking about people's feelings. As Zeb was, talking, people like us were surprised. It's like, what does this mean? What does this pandemic mean? So I stayed. Some of my colleagues went to Hong Kong before the territory got locked down. And when I left towards the end of February, it was still within a continuity of doing a news story. I was in South Korea because it was becoming the big place to go outside of continental China. But being far from, the family and being amongst the first zone in the world to experience that pandemic was a challenge, not just for regular life as a resident, but a very, very important journalistic challenge. Yes, and we could not imagine everything that was going to happen after. And and we talked to you, hearing you talk about China, we were never able to imagine that it would make it all the way here. It's something that we weren't able to even realize at the time. So it was so important to have you there, and you did formidable work. So time is going by so quickly. We'll now go to the third block. We've already said we have the privilege of working for the public broadcaster. So we have this very important mandate of informing you every day from everywhere in the world. And it's quite a mandate, believe me.
Work for our national public broadcaster. Many have said it before. And it's our mandate to inform you every day from everywhere or almost everywhere. And we received questions for you on that theme. Alors, on va commencer avec une question sur les...
So we're going to start a question on fake news because there's so much of that now that it has taken such an expansion because of the proliferation of messages on social media.
For you, Susan, let's talk about fake news because it has become Donald Trump's favorite phrase over the years, and it has undermined society's trust in news reporting. What is the impact on your work, and what has been the impact on your work?
It's been huge. I think what I've noticed the most is how fake news as a slogan, a brand, repeated over and over by Donald Trump as propaganda really has become like a cancer. I hear it now in other places in the world. I've heard it in Canada, I've heard it in Europe, I've heard it from world leaders like Bashar al-Assad. It's something that is used now as a tool to diminish journalists, to diminish what we do, to make us all one bit of propaganda ourselves, to call us biased, slanted, tainted. It's had an enormous impact. And I think what's difficult is we're right in the middle of it, Celine. In North America, particularly in the United States, where I've been for the last couple of years, it's so divided. The media landscape is so divided. The lines between opinion, commentary, and fact-based news reporting have blurred. That's made it more difficult. I often, go out now and get questions about, well, what were you told to report? And I can confidently say I've never been told to report anything. I've argued with my desk about what we should report, but I've never been told by the CBC or any other media company what to report. But many people do have that feeling that we are being manipulated by outside forces, by political forces particularly. And it's a virus, it's virulent, it's strong, certainly covering the Trump in his last year when he was running for re-election, it was nerve-wracking at times because it was very hostile and very aggressive. So I think that we have to continue to work hard to maintain our standards, to keep our integrity intact. That's essentially what I have to offer is integrity, all of us. But I'm hoping that we can start to battle back against this assumption that we are fake. To me, it is amusing. The fact that people would think that what I report is fake. It may be not the prism with which they see the world, and we have to work on getting all sides often as we do, but it's not fake. I can assure you.
But has it changed with the arrival, with President Biden? Is it different now, or is it still the same?
Yeah. Well, no, it's not the same. I mean, the whole temperature of the way the president approaches the press corps is different. For example, today at the summit, he was quite sharp after a question from CNN. Caitlin Collins, a venerable White House reporter, he was very sharp and sort of dismissive in his approach to her at the end of the news conference. He apologized. He apologized publicly for being short-tempered with her, and she said it wasn't necessary, but she appreciated it. That would have never happened. As you well know, the former president considered the media the enemy and would call people out deliberately in news conferences. When I first went to Washington, I was quite surprised at how often that happened and how mean-spirited in some cases the reception was toward journalists. So there has been a change of temperature, but it's not politically based. It's just based on the leadership of the country now seeing the press in a different way. Now, that may change. As Joe Biden gets further along in his administration, things are going to get rougher for him. He will be tested on his agenda, on his performance, and there will be more friction. But that's part of journalism. That's normal. So I think as journalists, though, we need to fight back against being labeled as fake media. And I think we all need to do that on a regular basis, not in a defensive way, but in a pragmatic and true-hearted way, really.
So I want to ask the same question actually to Azeb, but we have to go a little bit faster, Azeb. So a short answer on this one, please.
D'accord, écoutez, Céline.
Well, listen, Céline, yes, just a little bit to go with what Susan said. When I arrive with the cameraman and we're asked, are you real news or are you fake news? Who do you work for? Do you have an agenda? And I think that it is so important that, the public broadcasters, CBC, Radio-Canada, because when we look at the US, for example, CNN or Fox News, those are really just two opinions. You look at the evening news, journalists are just commentating, they're giving their opinions, whether it be from one chain to the other. Whereas with us at Radio-Canada, CBC, we really have a code of ethics, journalistic practices. What we write have been really gotten through to make sure that it's true. Remember that Donald Trump said the journalists were the enemy of the people. And, he could communicate, and we had to remember that. He could communicate with his public. He had over 80 million people who followed him on Twitter. He didn't really need journalists anymore if he wanted to send out a message. But today, with the Biden administration, he's trying to come back, of course, to the tradition of going through journalists who ask him questions. But I think that social media really have changed a little how things took place, how politicians could communicate with the public. So for us, obviously, in the field in the U.S., as soon as we say that we're Canadian, people are more open to talk to us, whereas the U.S. media have a harder time. Of course, everything has changed. People are a little more violent. Recently, a journalist from BBC in Westminster was chased down by people who were against wearing masks, against the vaccine, because they estimated that the journalist was an agent of propaganda working for a political party, that he had some kind of agenda. And that impression is really perceived in a lot of people. And what is sad is that very often these are people who are not very well informed, not very educated very often, and who follow sites that tell them, well, this is what the truth is, what journalists say is fake. And of course, every day in the field, we have to prove that we're there for a reason, which is just to inform that we are there as well to, defend and inform them as much as we can. But of course, it is an additional challenge that has been added to the past few years. I'd like to hear Stephen on that as well, because Stephen, you've covered this as well.
Presidential election in the United States. So what's your experience with it?
Yeah, as Susan did a good job of describing how fake news has become weaponized and exported around the world, and you see dictators around the world using it as a hammer to tamp down on free expression and free media in their own way, using what Donald Trump did in the US as a model. And that's sort of one aspect of fake news. We see it on the ground where, as the others were saying, somebody will walk up to you and the first thing they will say is, are you that fake news? Or are you going to report the truth? Or who did you get your orders from today? And I mean, and this is not something that's even happened to me just in the United States. It's happened to me in Canada, where I've had visiting family. I've had a neighbor came up to me, and actually the first thing he said to me was, "Oh, so do you guys just have a meeting every morning and discuss the fake news you're going to broadcast?" And so it's really become this brush that people paint the media with. And so as Susan said, we really have to fight against it. But there's also a very practical application and a sort of a different side of fake news, which is the actual news and information that's just not real, that's out there. And when you're dealing with breaking news, oftentimes you're getting a lot of information from different sources. And what's really come about in the last few years is there are people out there that will deliberately put fake information out there. So for example, a mass shooting in the United States, one of the first things we try to find out is information about the alleged shooter. And there is a group of people that will go out and put photos of individuals who have nothing to do with the shooting, but claim that that's the individual. And one of the most important questions in our job is, how do you know? How do you know something? And so with fake news, the other very practical aspect we have to deal with often is, how do you know if this is real or not? And so it adds another layer of fact-checking, verification to our job on top of the the attacks that we get from people on the street. It also adds a very different layer in terms of just verifying the information that we use in our stories, because it has become such a virus, such a problem. And it's definitely something we have to fight against, not just in the United States, around the world, but here in Canada as well. And so it's interesting. I was just in Israel, and I had a guy come up to me, and he started talking about Hunter Biden, the President Biden's son, and his laptop, and why that story wasn't covered in the United States during the election. And here I was in a town in northern Israel talking to somebody about that, and somebody accusing me of being fake news and not covering the real story. And so you just never know when it's going to pop up and where it's going to happen. But we have to just continually deal with it, not in a confrontational way, in a very practical and a very non-confrontational way, just providing the information in a fair and balanced and accurate way, and an empathetic way as well. Because sometimes those attacks from people come from a place of fear, and sometimes they're just painting everybody with the brush and with the same brush, and you have to educate them about different media sources and help them figure out where stories are coming from and why they can trust some agencies over other sources of information. And so it's definitely added a lot of work to our job, apart from just reporting the news in general. It's added definitely another layer, and at times risk as well. But luckily I haven't had any dangerous situations as a result of that.
Good. C'est vrai que tous les grands médias ont ajouté
all the great media have added fact verification teams. Radio-Canada did it, CBC has done it, the big newspapers have done it, to try to make sure that everything is fact-checked, and there's a lot to do.
We're going to lose Susan in a few minutes. So une question envoyée par Rachid.
A question sent by Rachid Ben-Larbi on Instagram. Susan.
Atmosphere on social networks for quite some time. There's aggression, even violence, and journalists are particularly affected by this. Women and racialized people are often targeted by this violence. So how do you live it, and how can you change things? Vast question.
Yeah, everyone deals with social media differently in our jobs. I'm what I would say social media conservative. And by that, I mean that I do not engage with people who criticize me unless they're pointing out an error that I can fix, which happens. And I appreciate audience members when they do that. But I back away from getting into a debate on social media most of the time, because I don't think it's very productive. It's not really my belief. It's not my role to do that. My reporting is my work. It is what I put out there. Criticize my work. If there's a mistake, we'll correct it. But that's how I deal with it. But I know that lots of people deal with it in different ways. It's become a very difficult space for many people. Many people get targeted, accused, and a lot of time hurt by what they see on social media. We're very public. People think that they can talk to us in that way and criticize us. I don't mind the criticism, but I do try to stay back from that. And I do think that That is one way to approach it. It's not the only way, but it's a way that perhaps can insulate yourself a little bit from the really bad stuff. Celine, I just want to say in closing and explain to our audience that I hesitate to go because the biggest compliment to me is when somebody asks me what I do. I love talking about what we do. It's my passion. However, we've had a long day here and I'm not yet finished. We have a national newscast tonight in 3 hours and I do need to go and prepare the report on the summit here in Geneva for that. So I'm regretting that I have to step away, and I really have enjoyed speaking with all of you today and hope that we do this more often, because one thing I can say for sure is our audience and people out there are very keen to know more about what we do. And transparency is good, but also just sharing stories about how we do our work, the challenges, and what they can give us in terms of ideas about how to approach it differently.
Thank you very much for your time, Susan. We really appreciate it. It was great listening to you, to all your stories. And I know what it is, the goat with the warlord. I've been there too, so very good anecdote. Thanks. Now,
okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. I'll talk to Yannick, Yannick qui doit aussi nous quitter parce que lui aussi.
Yannick, who also has to leave because he also still has work to do. It wasn't the best schedule for you this week, but we were so happy to have you. So Yannick, I think that you wanted to say a word on fake news, on misinformation. And I have another question for you after. Well, I will be brief here because, of course, time is going by, but it's true that there's fake news and we have to, clean things up and all of that. There's threats as well sometimes. But in what people talk about, the criticism that people use, towards media with fake news, there's sometimes one thing that is interesting, and I've discovered it by covering Trump, who, when he was elected in 2015, some criticisms are valid, and I started absorbing them and think about my work, about the way that I work. So there's that as well. Sometimes it makes things complicated because, of course, we have to sort between what is fake news and what is a valid criticism of the work that we did or somebody else did. So it really is not an easy period for journalists, but I would say that it is an interesting period because we have to remain, really above everything. Yes, and a small example on what you were just talking about, maybe? Well, an example. The source of COVID, does it come from this lab in China, for example? In France, the media have truly said no. A long time ago, Mensago said that's not a source, it's not there, it's not possible. But now people in the US are talking about it, and all of a sudden it's back in the news in France saying, oh, well, maybe it does come from a lab in China. And now people are criticizing, saying, well, but you criticized us saying that we were wrong to talk about the lab, and now you're saying all of a sudden that it's true. So there's a bit of a contradiction in the treatment of media on a daily basis or hour to hour. And some people, mention it, and they're right to mention it. Yeah, it's more to say we don't really know what's going on. No. Another question that we had for you, what does it change as far as you're concerned to work for a public broadcaster? Does it make a difference on your coverage of the events that are taking place internationally? It makes a difference, I believe, when we present ourselves, when we introduce ourselves to people and take the time to say, I am a public broadcaster, and friends, the media, private media are associated to big groups, so to more left or right-hand politics or leaning politics. But now we are considered to be a little bit more neutral. So when people take the time to ask a question, when we explain that, I notice certain differences. There's an opening that is a little bit more interesting on that. In the US, we could, for example, say we're a little bit like the BBC. So people are like, oh, okay, so you're not CNN, you're not Fox News. And that brought back some goodwill to conversations. Very well. Well, thank you so much, Yannick, for having been there, and we'll let you go back to work as well. Of course, it is a priority, and we understand that very well. People who are with us as well understand that very well. Thank you so much. It was very interesting. Well, thank you, and have a great end to the day. Yes, and good comeback later on in Quebec. We're very, very welcoming people, you'll see. Yes, of course.
To Stephen, too, on that question. How does working for the national public broadcaster influence your coverage of events?
I think, Yannick said, was talking about, we're not perceived as being too far to the left or too far to the right as a lot of media organizations in the United States are. And so when I was in the United States, saying that we're from CBC and we're a public broadcaster sometimes would open doors or allow a certain level of comfort with people who may have been reticent to speak with another media organization. And Canada holds a very good reputation around the world. And so when we were just in the Middle East, we were speaking with a group of Jews and Arabs who were talking about the extremes and how those small pockets of coexistence that have come between the two people have been frayed by the extremes. And some of these people were unwilling to speak with local media out of fear or out of fear of how the story was going to be spun. But when we said we were Canadian, they were happy to speak with us, and they felt a comfort level that we would tell their story in a good way. And I feel like that's something, a responsibility that we as foreign correspondents hold, is that we're not only representing the CBC, but we're representing Canada as well. And CBC has such a great reputation around the world. And when I first came to New York, mentioning that I was with CBC, put a lot of people at ease because they had dealt with CBC in the past. And so I felt it was my responsibility to continue that and to prove by our work that we maintain a high level of journalism. And so it's always important to be able to tell stories from the perspective of Canadians, but I think it's always important to note that Canadians have a curiosity around the world. Of course, there's so many Canadians whose homes are other parts of the world, so they naturally want to know what's happening elsewhere. But Canadians in general, I feel, are curious about what's happening in other countries around the world. And I feel like when we're out there, we can tell stories rooted in those other places, and they don't necessarily have to be about a Canadian or rooted in Canada. They can be rooted in these other places, and there are certain universal truths when we tell these stories. And so I feel it's always very important to represent the public broadcaster, to be representing Canada. And you never know when you're going to find a little piece of Canada around the world. I was just mentioning how we were in Israel and speaking with these groups who were speaking to us about coexistence, and this one Jewish woman we were speaking with turned out to be a huge Leonard Cohen fan. And when we went to her home, she had an entire wall of Leonard Cohen pictures and albums. And after doing a very emotional interview about a night where there was extremists protesting around her gas station, and she had to protect her Arab workers from this group of extremist Jews, it was a very emotional interview, very difficult for her to speak about it. And at the end of it, we sat down and we ended all talking about Leonard Cohen. And she played some Leonard Cohen music for us. And here we were sitting outside a gas station in northern Israel, listening to Leonard Cohen. And it was just such a beautiful moment. And it just spoke about so many universal truths and so many beautiful moments that, we're so appreciative of what we do and the people we meet. And that's always the best part about what we do is the people we meet around the world. And so I thought just a small piece of Canada so far away. Wow. It was a really nice moment.
Wow, fascinating. Thank you. Alors maintenant, une question.
Well, now one question, and time is going by so quickly, really, so we don't have very many. One from Kirk MacArthur from Calgary in Alberta. Are you negatively influenced when you are in China? It can be a negative opinion or services or lodging is what he asked. Do you feel pressure to show the communist regime differently from what it really is? I think it's a pretty delicate question, so I'll give you a little bit of time to answer, but not too much time. Yes, it's true that it's delicate, but what I've felt throughout my mandate is that it became more and more difficult to ask questions on sensitive subjects, whether it be to ordinary people by going to their homes. Because just to explain to you, in China, there are places where everybody knows who goes and speaks to whom. They know when they speak to foreigners, and also speaking with specialists on sensitive subject. And I'll give you an example. In 2019, there were experts to whom we talked about the commercial war with the United States or North Korea or the question of the second child in China. There are some experts who had made us understand, not only to us, but to other foreigners, that from the spring to the fall, they would not be available to speak to foreign media, and that was because of two sensitive events in continental China. The 30th anniversary of the Tiananmen Square massacre, which is taboo in China. Remember, it's not even in history books in continental China. And also the anniversary of the founding of the Popular Republic of China. So we were told we can't talk to you then, and we understood. And talking about that anniversary, we could mention that many journalists who have been there for a long time, like myself in Beijing, we had not even had an accreditation to go and cover the large parade that for that anniversary. So it's becoming more and more difficult. I have colleagues who had their visas who were supposed to be renewed that weren't, or that were renewed, only for a short amount of time, 1 month, 2 months. And also they make us understand when a subject they don't like, At the ministry, they said that I covered the pro-democracy protest in Hong Kong too much, I really felt that. So, but we all have that passion together, that importance of going in the field and seeing what's going on. And that we have to surmount those obstacles. That's what guides us. That makes the beauty of our job, and to continue despite the obstacles. And once we get over those hurdles and we have information, despite everything, it's satisfying, and we think, okay, we were there. We were there with our eyes open, our ears open, and we were able to talk about it with Canadians, to be able to talk to them about it, and they weren't there. So we're able to see crisis. For example, when I covered the funerals of Nelson Mandela for over a week, I had to pinch myself. I barely believed that I was there. I was not the only person in the stadium at that time. So in difficulties, but also when it's easier, it's important to be able to go in the field, to be able to see what is happening and report it in all objectivity as much as possible, because we don't always have access to everybody, but it really is what makes the beauty of this job. And you did it for all those years, and so well. Annick, we thank you for it. It was a privilege. One last question for Azeb. Would you say, Azeb, that the situation of journalists has improved in the world in 2020-21? It's a difficult question. I would say something that we would like for it to improve, but I think that the situation of journalists has deteriorated rather. If I make a comparison, when I started in this job, the risks that journalists incurred were, if you went into a war zone, well, that was a certain level of risk. And then there was September 11. And journalists became a target. They were taken hostage. And you remember the journalist Daniel Pearl who was killed in Pakistan. And today, journalists are, in fact, a little bit the target of people who think, that they are agents of propaganda, part of a machine that is against the people. Trump has repeated it so often, we are the enemies of the people. And also, talking about alternative facts, it was Kellyanne Conway, who talked about that in the administration. So we've become a target. The number of times where, for example, in the United States, when we covered a protest, people, we really have to calm them down. We have to talk to them a little bit about the job. Like Stephen D'Souza was saying, we have to calm them down, explain to them what it is that we do as a job. And more, either journalists are, they are kind of like attacked, but they also have the support of a certain part of the population. Whereas before, journalists used to be kind of like sacred, people who informed the public. So there was unwavering support. But today, the public is divided. They see journalists as either an agent of propaganda, as I was saying. There's that entire thing of fake news and other information that is being circulated in social media. I think that today we need more and more journalists who work for public broadcasters, because we have that neutrality. We're not, we don't make stories. We say what the facts are. We try to be as balanced as possible in our news reports. But unfortunately, I would say that today it's a challenge to be a journalist. I think that we do it because we're passionate about it. We want to inform. And of course, we love meeting people and telling stories. That is really what this job is about. But I would say that the situation of journalists has deteriorated, unfortunately. I also think that we have the privilege of working for a network, a company like CBC Radio-Canada, because of course we'd like to thank to all local journalists in many countries in the world who are experiencing situations that are very difficult and more difficult as well. Thank you so much, Azeb.
And now we'll finish on a high note with Salima, because there's a question sent by Sean from Lethbridge, Alberta. How has the opening of CBC's Mumbai bureau affected your work?
Oh, well, that's a great question. I'm going to start with a small thing, and feel free to laugh at me if you want. I am terrible at calculating time differences. So now, instead of counting on my fingers, I've actually installed several world clocks on my computer. So I have Mumbai time on there, I have London time on there, I have the Eastern time zone, just so I can make my deadline. So that's one way the new bureau has affected my work. But there are plenty of other things, quite frankly. It's certainly not a complaint. I love what I do. I know all of us love what we do, but often you're working in the dead of night. The National airs at 9 p.m. That's about 6:30 Mumbai time the next day, right, in the morning. So you have to factor that into how you do things, how you do interviews. It just affects sort of everything that you do. Also, a lot of us, we've all been talking about this climate of fake news. That is very prevalent in India as well, a lot of facts sometimes, information rather, sometimes presented as fact. So you have to just be very aware of that. Having worked in covered politics for such a long time, I'm used to fact checking on the fly, but it takes on a deeper meaning in India when you're covering so many touchy subjects, a lot of things very sensitive to very different religious communities. And so our coverage, my work, my team's work with my video producer there, Glenn, it is and will be scrutinized. So as it should be, quite frankly, but that is something that you have to be conscious about when you're on the ground and working there and bringing the stories back to Canada. But that also shows how important it is, right, for us to be there on the ground and be telling those stories. Absolutely. And as a last point, I'd say every story you do, every interview you do affects you and changes you, and you bring all of that with you to your future stories. So that is how it works and how things change you as a journalist.
And we wish you luck and lots of great stories in that incredible country in India, and we're eager to see what you're going to send us as stories. Thank you, Salima. Voilà, c'est ce qui met fin.
And this puts an end already to the annual public assembly from CBC Radio-Canada.
Michael Goldbloom and Catherine Verdon-Diamond for the first segment of this event. And a special thanks, of course, to all my colleagues who were, wherever you are in the world today, Stephen, Susan, Salima, Azeb, Annick, Yannick. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you so much for the entire team that made this public assembly possible today. They've worked really hard. And thank you so much to you all who watched us and who participated to the annual public assembly. This is Irene Galipeau. Thank you for having been there. Goodbye.